The great hall of the Galactic Conclave had seen many things over its long history. It had seen wars declared and wars ended. It had seen the fall of empires and the rise of new ones. It had heard speeches that changed the fate of entire star systems. Its ceiling stretched so high that small clouds sometimes formed near the top, and its floor was made from the bones of a dead star, dark and dense and cold beneath the feet of every ambassador, general, and council member who walked across it. On this day the hall was full. 17 civilizations had sent their representatives. Some had scales. Some had wings folded tight against their backs. Some had no eyes at all and sensed the world through vibrations in the air. They sat in their curved rows, arranged in a wide circle around the central platform, and they all had one thing in common: they were afraid, not of each other. They had spent centuries learning to tolerate each other. What frightened them, what had brought every one of them to this hall on this particular day, was something new, something young, something that had only recently found its way to the stars and was now spreading through them like light through a broken window. The humans, the conclave, had been watching humanity for nearly 200 years. In the beginning, no one had been particularly worried. The humans were small, their planet was small, their weapons were crude, their ships were slow, and they seemed to spend most of their time arguing with each other. The general feeling among the older civilizations was that humanity would either destroy itself or quietly settle a few nearby systems and stay out of trouble. Neither of those things had happened. Instead, the humans had expanded, slowly at first, then faster. They moved into systems that other species had looked at and decided were too dangerous systems with unstable stars, hostile atmospheres, toxic soil. They moved into those systems and they stayed, they built, they grew, and they kept going. Now they were close, too close, some said. Close enough that the war hawks in the conclave had begun making noise about containment, about sending a message, about reminding these young creatures that the galaxy already had an order to it, and that order did not include humanity running wild through it. High Marshal Drevith was the loudest of these voices. He was tall, even for his species, the Velm, with a long pale face and 6 fingers on each hand that he was always moving, always tapping, always pointing. He had been pushing for action against the humans. For 3 years he had maps, he had projections, he had a great deal of confidence. What he did not have was the support of General Vraxel. Vraxel entered the hall from the far door, and the sound in the room changed when he appeared, not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone recognizes something serious has arrived. He was Cathari, broad and low to the ground on 4 powerful legs, with 2 large arms and 2 smaller ones folded against his chest. His scales were the deep black of deep space, worn in places where old wounds had healed over. His eyes were amber and very still. He had fought in 9 wars. He had won 8 of them. The 9th had ended in a negotiated peace that most historians considered even more impressive than a victory would have been. He was not a creature who frightened easily. He was not a creature who spoke without thinking. And when he had been summoned to this hall, every member of the conclave had expected him to walk to the central platform and begin laying out a military strategy for dealing with the humans. He did not do that. He walked to the platform slowly, set down a small data chip on the surface, and looked out at the faces of 17 civilizations looking back at him. He was quiet for a long moment, not because he was nervous. He was never nervous. He was quiet because he wanted them to understand that what came next was not something he said lightly. I have been asked to advise this council on the matter of the humans, he said. His voice was deep and even with no rise or fall in it. I was told the council wants a war plan, a strategy for military engagement that would contain human expansion and make clear to them that the Galactic Conclave is not something they can grow around or through. He paused. I will not give you that plan. The silence broke, not all at once but in pieces. Voices rose from different sections of the circle. Dreveth was on his feet immediately, his long fingers pointing down at the platform. Several others joined him. Protest, and for a short time the hall became loud and disorganized in the way that large groups of frightened creatures always become. Vraxel waited. He did not move. He did not react. He simply stood on the platform and let the noise happen around him, the way a stone lets water happen around it. After a while the noise settled. It always does. I will not give you a war plan, he said again, because a war plan implies there is a war worth planning for. What I have seen tells me there is not one we can win, not one we can survive without consequences that would take generations to recover from. Dreveth sat down slowly, his expression hard. What I will give you, Vraxel continued, is something more valuable than a strategy. I will give you the truth. I have spent 30 years watching these creatures. I have read every report, reviewed every piece of footage, and personally led the reconnaissance program that gave us most of what we know about them. I will tell you what I found, and then this council can decide what to do with that information. He looked around the room. Some faces showed doubt, some showed frustration. A few, the older ambassadors, the ones who had been watching the galaxy longer than most, showed something closer to relief, as if they had been hoping someone would say exactly this and had been afraid no one would. Vraxel placed one large hand flat on the surface of the platform next to the data chip. The humans are not what you think they are, he said. Most of you have built your picture of them from early reports, from the years when their ships were slow and their signals were weak and they seemed like nothing more than a young species feeling its way around a new neighborhood. That picture is old. That picture is wrong. What they are now, what they have become in the time we have been watching them and deciding whether to take them seriously, is something this council needs to understand before it makes any decisions. He picked up the data chip and held it up for the room to see. Everything I know is on here. I will walk you through it. I ask only that you listen without interrupting, because some of what I am going to tell you is going to be difficult to accept, not because it is unclear, because it is very clear and very uncomfortable. He set the chip back down. Around the hall, the representatives of 17 civilizations settled into their seats. Some crossed their arms, some leaned forward, some exchanged looks with their neighbors, quick, uncertain glances that asked the question none of them wanted to say out loud. What could possibly make the Empire's greatest general refuse to fight? Vraxel looked out at All of them, and for just a moment. Something moved behind his amber eyes. Not fear, he was past fear. It was something quieter than fear, and heavier. It was the look of a creature who had already understood something that everyone else in the room was about to learn. He began to speak. The data chip was small. Vraxel had carried it in the inner pocket of his uniform for 3 days before this meeting, which was not something he normally did. With intelligence files, files were stored in secure systems, files were accessed through terminals. But this one he had kept close, the way one keeps close a thing that cost a great deal to obtain. He pressed it into the reader built into the platform, and the lights in the hall shifted as the display screens around the curved walls came alive with information, numbers, maps, footage, reports written in the clinical language of military scouts who were trained to observe and record without letting emotion into their words. Some of them had not entirely succeeded. 30 years, Vraxel said, that is how long the reconnaissance program ran. 17 scout vessels, 42 missions into human space. The data I am presenting to you today was gathered at great cost and verified multiple times. None of it is speculation. All of it is observed fact. He let the room look at the screens for a moment. The maps showed human space how it had looked 30 years ago. A small cluster of systems close to their home world, and how it looked now. A broad and growing shape that pushed outward in every direction like something alive. The first thing you need to understand about the humans, he said, is that they do not stop. He said it simply, without drama, and that was what made it land. Every species in this hall evolved with what we call a biological limit. When things become bad enough, when losses are severe enough, when suffering passes a certain point, there is a response that is built into living creatures, a step back, submission, and acceptance that continuing is worse than stopping. This is not weakness, it is wisdom, written into the body by millions of years of survival. Every species we have ever encountered has this response. He paused. The humans do not. He brought up a section of their own historical records, old footage, rough and grainy by any standard, from the early centuries of human civilization, wars, disasters, famines that wiped out enormous portions of their population, diseases that swept across their world and killed more people than most species had ever produced in their entire history. Each of these events, Vraxel said, would have broken any other species we know. Not permanently, but long enough to mature, long enough for a recovery period. Measured in generations, the humans recovered from each of these events and then, without exception, continued exactly what they had been doing before. Sometimes faster, sometimes with more determination than before, as if the suffering had not tired them but had instead reminded them of something. A low murmur moved through the hall. Vraxel did not pause for it. The second thing you need to understand is how they develop under pressure. The screens changed. Now they showed a timeline, human technology laid out across centuries. The council members who knew how to read such displays leaned forward slightly. The line was not steady. It moved slowly for long stretches, then suddenly jumped. Great leaps forward clustered around the periods of their worst conflicts. In peacetime, Vraxel said, human technology grows at a rate that is impressive but not remarkable. They are inventive creatures and they make progress. But in wartime something changes. The pace becomes something else entirely. What took them 4 centuries to develop in stable conditions, they developed in 11 years during the period of their second large planetary war. 11 years, the Cathari made the same leap. In 430 years, High Marshal Drevith's fingers had stopped moving. This is not an accident, Vrax Sol continued. It is a pattern that appears every time they face a threat large enough to unite them, which brings me to the third thing. He brought up more footage. Scout recordings taken from distance of human population centers during a period of external threat, the streets, the manufacturing centers, the communications networks humming with traffic. Humans disagree with each other constantly. Their political systems are loud and their societies are fractured along many lines. If you read their news broadcasts, you might conclude that they are on the edge of falling apart at any moment. They argue about everything. They always have. Our earlier analysts saw this and concluded it was a weakness, a division that could be exploited. He shook his head slowly. It is not a weakness. The arguing stops when something from outside threatens all of them at once. We have seen it in their history. We saw it in our observations. When the threat is internal, when humans fight each other, they are divided and unpredictable. When the threat is external, when something that is not human threatens them, they become something else entirely. They unify in a way that is not political or organized or planned. It simply happens, as if the arguing is the normal state of a creature that is always ready to stop arguing the moment it needs to. He let that sit for a moment. We modeled a strike against 3 of their outer colonies. In the model, we expected their response to be fragmented, different colony governments making different decisions, some fighting, some negotiating, some waiting to see what happened. That is how most civilizations respond to a sudden attack on their frontier. He brought up the modeling results. In every version of the model, their response was unified within 72 hours. 72 hours. That is faster than most of our own military commands can coordinate a response, and they did it without a central authority giving orders. It simply happened. The hall was very quiet now. The fourth thing I need to show you, Vrax Sol said, is their production capacity. This was the part he had debated presenting last because he knew it would be the hardest to accept. The numbers were not the kind of numbers that were easy to look at. He brought up a single image, a human orbital shipyard, one of their larger ones. Though not their largest, the structure was enormous, a dark framework hanging in space with dozens of vessels in various stages of construction visible along its length. The scale indicator in the corner of the image told the story more clearly than any words could. Our analysts initially assumed human industrial output would follow standard patterns. They based their models on Cathari and Velum production rates adjusted for human population and resource access. Those models were wrong by a factor of approximately 6. Several council members shifted in their seats 6 times. He repeated, they produce nearly 6 times what we projected, and the rate is not static. It has been increasing each decade as they develop new methods and expand into resource-rich systems. He let the image Stay on the screens for a long time. Then he said the thing that finished the silence entirely. 3 of our scout vessels were destroyed during the course of this program. I want to be clear about that because the circumstances matter. They were not destroyed by human warships. They were not destroyed by military patrols or weapons platforms or anything designed specifically for combat. He looked out at the room. They were destroyed by a civilian cargo freighter, a trading vessel that had been equipped with weapons by its owner. It detected our scouts, identified them as a threat, and engaged. The captain of that vessel filed a report afterward with the local human authority. Our analysts obtained a translation of that report. He brought the text up on the screen. Short, matter of fact, a routine account of a routine decision. The captain described the incident as a standard response to suspected piracy. She noted that the threat had been neutralized and that her cargo had been delivered on time. Vraxall looked out at 17 civilizations. On time, he said quietly. She mentioned that her cargo was delivered on time. No one spoke. That was a civilian, a traitor. And she destroyed 3 of the finest scout vessels in the Cathari fleet without losing a day of work. He let his eyes move slowly around the circle of faces. Now ask yourselves what their soldiers are like. Vraxall stepped back from the edge of the platform. It was a small movement, but everyone in the hall noticed it. In 30 years of watching him speak in rooms like this one, no one had ever seen him step back from anything. He stood still for a moment, his 2 large arms at his sides, his smaller arms folded in the way they always were when he was thinking carefully about something. Then he did something else that no one expected. He turned off the screens. The data disappeared, the maps and numbers and footage went dark in the hall, returned to its natural light, the cold blue glow that came from the starboard floor and the high windows above. Some of the council members looked at the blank screens and then back at the general with expressions of confusion. Vraxall spoke. What I am going to tell you now is not in any file, he said. It is not part of the official record of the reconnaissance program. It has never been reported to this council or to the Cathari military command, because I made a decision at the time that it was a personal matter and not a military one. I have changed my mind about that. You need to hear it. Hall stayed quiet. Even Dreveth did not move. 14 years ago, Vraxall said, my survey vessel suffered a drive failure at the edge of a human frontier system. We had been running a passive observation pass, no active sensors, no communications, running cold and dark, the way scouts do. The failure was sudden, a cascade fault in the secondary drive array, the kind of thing that happens rarely but happens. We lost propulsion and began drifting. He paused. He was not a creature who told personal stories. The fact that he was telling one now was doing something to the atmosphere of the room. Everyone leaned very slightly forward. We had enough power to repair if we worked quickly. My crew began the work immediately. We estimated 4 hours to restore minimal drive function, 4 hours during which we were sitting still in a system where we were not supposed to be, running dark, hoping nothing came close enough to notice us. He looked at the floor for a moment. Just a moment. Something came close enough to notice us. He described it The way he remembered it, a small vessel, human design, research class. Not military, it came from the inner system, moving along a survey path in altered course when its sensors picked up something unexpected sitting in space, where nothing should have been sitting. It did not do what a military vessel would have done. It did not hail for backup. It did not power weapons immediately or move to defensive position. It came closer. It was an exploration ship. Vraxall said. 6 crew. A science team led by a xenobiologist named Dr. Yale Morin. She was conducting a survey of the system's outer asteroid field and was not supposed to have any contact with anyone that day. Her ship was lightly armed, 2 mounted weapons, standard for a frontier research vessel, enough to deter pirates, not enough to threaten anything built for combat. He paused when she came close enough to see us on visual, to see that we were not anything she had encountered before. She did not turn around. She did not increase speed or change course. She continued on her approach, and she opened a communication channel. Vraxall remembered that moment with perfect clarity. He had been standing at the command console, watching the human vessel grow larger on the display, calculating odds and outcomes. His crew had looked to him. They had 3 options: run, which they could not do because they had no drive; fight, which would alert every human authority in the system to their presence and destroy any future reconnaissance; or respond. He had chosen to respond. When her face appeared on my screen, he said. She looked at me for about 3 seconds. Just looked, taking in what she was seeing, a Cathar face, which I am told is not an easy thing to look at without preparation. And then she said, I don't know what you are, but I'd really prefer we talk before this gets stupid. A sound moved through the hall. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a gasp. It was the sound of 17 different species processing the same information in 17 different ways. I want you to understand what that sentence means, Vraxall said. She encountered an unknown vessel of unknown origin, clearly not human, sitting disabled in her system. She had no idea what she was looking at. She had no idea if I was dangerous. She had no idea if talking to me would start something she could not finish. And her response to all of that uncertainty was not fear. It was not aggression. It clears throat was a calm, direct request to handle the situation in the least destructive way available. He let that sit. We talked. The conversation lasted 2 hours. My translator worked imperfectly, but well enough. She asked questions about us, not tactical questions, not questions about weapons or numbers or intentions. She asked about our biology, our history, what we found interesting about the universe. She answered the same questions in return, easily and without hesitation, as if she had been waiting her whole life for exactly this conversation. What he did not tell the council, what he had never told anyone, was how he had felt during those 2 hours. He was a general. He had been in rooms with warlords and tyrants and creatures that could destroy a planet. He had never felt quite what he felt in that conversation. It was not fear. It was something closer to the feeling one gets when standing at the edge of something very large and looking down. When my crew had finished repairs, he continued, she offered to help. She had a supply of the correct type of alloy that my team needed for the drive casing. She had it because research Vessels in human space are equipped to handle a wide range of emergency repairs. In the field, she transferred it across without asking for anything in return before I left her channel. I told her that this meeting had not happened, that it would be better for both of us if she did not report the encounter. I expected her to argue. I expected her to ask questions about why. She looked at me for a moment and then nodded and said, "Fair enough. Be careful out there." Vraxel's voice did not change. It was still flat and even and measured. She did not power down her weapons lock for the entire time we spoke, not once. She was warm and open and curious and completely helpful, and she never once took her hand off the trigger. He looked around the hall. "That is the thing I want you to hold in your mind. Not as a military fact, not as a data point, but as a true picture of what these creatures are." She was a scientist. She studied life in the universe because she found it beautiful and worth knowing. She helped a disabled alien vessel because it was the right thing to do. And she kept her weapons ready every second because she was not stupid. He was quiet for a moment. When I left that system, she waved through the viewport of her ship. She raised her hand and she waved at me, the way her species does when something ends and they want it to end well. He looked at the council. "I have faced the warlords of the Drank hegemony. I have sat across tables from creatures that destroyed entire civilizations for territory. I have negotiated with species that considered every other form of life a resource to be used. Not one of them had the composure that Dr. Yale Marin showed on an ordinary afternoon when a broken alien ship appeared in her system without warning. He folded his large hands together. She was their baseline, their ordinary. If that is what a human scientist looks like under pressure, then I need you to truly ask yourselves, truly, without pride, without the comfort of old assumptions, what their soldiers must be." High Marshal Drevith had been quiet for a long time. That was unusual for him. And GT clears throat. And GT. He was a creature built for noise, for argument, for the kind of forceful certainty that fills rooms and pushes doubt out of them. But something about the last hour had taken the noise out of him, at least temporarily, and he sat in his place with his long fingers still and his pale face unreadable. He was not convinced. Vraxel could see that clearly, but he was listening. That was enough for now. Vraxel turned the screens back on. 2 years ago, he said, the Conclave commissioned a study. Most of you in this room were involved in approving it, though the details of what the study found were not shared widely. I know this because I ran it. He brought up a title on the screen, a classification marker at the top, red and heavy. Beneath it, a simple title: Projected Outcomes, Military Engagement with Human Space, the finest strategic minds we could gather from 6 species. Vraxel said, the best modeling systems in the Conclave. 18 months of work, every variable accounted for. We gave ourselves every advantage in the models that could reasonably be justified. We ran the scenarios until the results stopped changing. He looked around the room. The results were classified immediately after they were processed. I am declassifying them now in this room because this council cannot make a good decision without knowing what they say. He brought up the first scenario. Short war, a fast and decisive strike. intended to break human military capacity before they could fully mobilize. In this model, the Empire launches a coordinated strike against human military installations in their outer systems. 12 targets, maximum force. The objective is to damage their ability to respond before they understand what is happening. He let the projection play out. It was not a pleasant thing to watch, even in the abstract language of models and projections. But the Council watched. In the first month, the strike is successful. Human losses are significant. Their outer defense network is disrupted. Many in the Council expected this to be the end of it, a quick show of force that would bring the humans to a negotiation table. He stopped the projection at month 3. By the 3rd month, they are producing replacement vessels faster than we are, destroying them, not because they had pre-built stockpiles, because their shipyards, which are spread across dozens of systems and not concentrated in any one place, immediately shifted to full wartime production. By month 18, they are producing at a rate that exceeds our own, and they are angry. He closed the first scenario. Short war does not end the war. It starts one. And once it starts, time works against us. He brought up the second scenario. Long war, sustained military pressure. A war of attrition intended to grind down human capacity over years. This is the scenario that most of our war hawks prefer, he said without looking at Drevith. The logic is that the Empire has more resources, more experience, and more allies. That over a long conflict, we simply outlast them. He let the model run longer this time. The Council watched the years tick forward on the projection. Year 1, Year 3, Year 5, Year 10. Human endurance does not decrease over time. Our own does. Their economy suffers, but ours suffers more because we are fighting across longer supply lines. Our member civilizations begin to disagree about the cost. 2 of them, I will not name them here, begin making quiet contact with human diplomatic channels in year 7 of the model, seeking separate arrangements. By year 12, the conclave is no longer unified. By year 15, in every version of this model, we have spent more than we have gained, and humanity is still fighting. He paused. In many versions of this scenario, they are fighting harder than they were at the start. He brought up the 3rd scenario, and the room tensed before he even explained it. The title on the screen was simple: Decapitation. Remove their leadership. Vraxel said. Strike their population centers, their governing bodies, their command structure. Create enough disruption at the top that the military cannot function. Several Council members nodded slightly. This was the strategy that felt most clean to them, most efficient. Vraxel shook his head. Once, every civilization we have ever applied this strategy to has a center, place where authority lives. Remove the authority and the body stops moving, not permanently but long enough. The humans do not have a center in that sense. Their authority is layered, redundant, and distributed. Their planetary governments operate independently of their colonial governments, which operate independently of their military commands, which are themselves divided into regional structures that do not require central orders to function. He brought up a diagram of it. The Council looked at it for a long moment in silence. Removing their leadership does not stop them. It fragments them into dozens of independent fighting forces, each one operating on its own initiative, each one making its own decisions. You do not get a stopped body, you get 100 smaller bodies, all moving, all armed, all motivated, and now none of them interested in any kind of negotiated settlement because the voices that might have negotiated are gone. He let that settle. There is no single throat to cut, he said. We looked for it. It is not there. He brought up the fourth and final scenario, and he kept his voice completely flat as he described it. Best case for the Empire. He said every advantage maximal, every human mistake modeled in, every piece of luck going our way. The projection showed a victory. Narrow, costly, slow, but a victory. Human space eventually brought to terms. The conclave standing over a broken opponent, the council looked at it with something like relief. Drevith sat up slightly, then Vraxel spoke. The cost. Let me show you the cost. The numbers came up on the side of the projection. Ships lost, personnel lost, member civilizations that did not survive the economic pressure of the war intact. Systems lost a conflict that would take a century to make habitable again, and at the bottom a separate count, the civilizations that had been neutral at the start of the war and had moved against the conclave before it ended, alarmed by the methods the Empire had been forced to use to achieve even the narrow victory. To win this way, Vraxel said, we would have to use weapons that most of the neutral galaxy considers unacceptable. We would win the war and lose the peace. The conclave that existed after this victory would be smaller, weaker, and more isolated than the one that exists today, and we would have achieved it against an opponent who, by the end of the model, was still not entirely defeated, only exhausted. He let the screen go dark again. There is one more scenario, he said. I debated showing it. I will show it, because honesty requires it. He brought it up. A scenario labeled simply optimal outcome. In this scenario, the Empire wins cleanly, decisively, quickly. Human losses are severe. Their capacity is destroyed and they accept terms. Within a year, several council members leaned forward. This scenario requires one thing, Vraxel said. It requires the humans to be exactly as unintelligent as many of you assumed they were when you first proposed this meeting. It requires them to make the mistakes we hoped they would make, leave the vulnerabilities we hoped they would leave, and respond to pressure the way we hoped they would respond. He looked around the room. They will not do those things. We know they will not do those things because 30 years of observation has shown us that they never do what we hope they will do. They do what is necessary. They do what works. They adapt. He closed the file. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the building systems was audible, a low, steady sound that had always been there but that no one usually noticed. Drevith's fingers were still. Vraxel stood in the silence and let the weight of it do the work that arguments could not. Numbers were easy to argue with, models were easy to dismiss, but silence that came after everything had been laid out and there was nothing left to say, that was harder to push away. He looked at the council. He looked at all of them. Now you know what the simulations say, he said. In our next meeting, I will tell you what I believe we should do instead. 3 days passed between the 4th session and the 5th. That had not been planned. Vraxel had intended to continue the same day, but the council had asked for time, and he had given it to them because he understood what they needed. They needed to sit with what they had heard. They needed to argue with each other in private, away from the central platform, away from the records. They needed to push back against the data rooms where no one was watching, and they needed to find on their own that the data did not bend. When they came back, they were quieter than before, not the quiet of people who had found peace, the quiet of people who had looked for a way out of something and had not found one. High Marshal Drevith came back. 2. He sat in his place with the same hard expression he had worn throughout, but there was something different in it now. The confidence had not left entirely. It was not in his nature to let it go, but it had shifted. It was the confidence of someone defending a position they were no longer fully sure of, which is a different and more difficult kind. Vraxel walked to the platform. He did not bring a data chip this time. He did not bring files or projections or footage. He stood on the platform with nothing in his hands and looked out at the council, and he spoke. Before I give you my advice, he said, I want to show you one last thing, not numbers, not models, something older than that. He had arranged for the hall systems to play a recording, not from the reconnaissance program, from the humans themselves, pulled from their own public archives, the vast open records they kept of their own history and made available to anyone who wanted to look. The Conclave had access to these records and had largely ignored them the way powerful civilizations often ignore the histories of species they consider beneath them. The recording was long, so they played a version that had been cut to 12 minutes. 12 minutes of human history compressed. The council watched it in silence. They saw the early centuries, a species small and fragile, scattered across a single world in clusters, fighting over land and water and belief. They saw plagues that emptied cities. They saw famines that lasted generations. They saw wars that tore entire continents apart, fought with weapons that were primitive compared to anything in the Conclave, but devastating to the creatures using them. And they saw after each of these things the same pattern repeating. The humans did not disappear. They did not collapse and stay collapsed. They rebuilt slowly, at first painfully, with great loss and great suffering, and then they moved forward again. Each time they moved forward, they moved a little further than before. Each time they rebuilt. They built something a little larger. 12 minutes, thousands of years. And at the end of it, a young species, looking up at the stars for the first time with the tools to actually reach them. Still here. Vraxel stopped the recording. That is who we are proposing to fight, he said. A species that has never in its entire recorded history encountered a threat large enough to stop it permanently. Every threat has failed. Every plague, every war, every catastrophe, all of them have failed to stop humans from continuing. We would be placing ourselves in a long line of things that have tried to end them, and we would be doing so without the excuse that the others had. Those threats did not know what they were dealing with. We do. Drevith moved in his seat. Vraxel looked at him. High Marshal, you have something to say. Drevith stood. He was careful about it, more careful than he usually was, as if he was aware that this moment required a certain kind of dignity. General Vraxel, he said, I have listened to everything you have presented, the data, the models, the story of your personal encounter. And I do not dispute the quality of your work, I dispute the conclusion. Go on. Vraxel said, you are advising this council to step back from a military option based on worst-case projections. Every model has worst-case projections. Ours include them because that is good practice, not because they are the most likely outcome. The conclave has fought and won against opponents who seemed overwhelming on paper before. The history of this empire is full of wars that the models said we should not fight, and that we won anyway. He looked around the room for support and found some faces nodding. You are asking us to retreat from our own expansion path because of a species that has not yet fired a single shot at us. They have not threatened us, they have not provoked us. You are asking us to change course because you are afraid of what they might do, not what they have done. Vraxel let him finish. He waited a beat after the last word. You are right that they have not fired at us, he said. I want you to think carefully about why. That is, he let the question sit. They know we are here, he said. They have known for some time. Their long-range sensors are more capable than we estimated, and they are not foolish. They have been extending diplomatic signals in our direction for 11 years. Careful ones, patient ones. They have not pushed, they have not demanded, they have simply left the door open and waited to see if anyone would walk through it. He let that land. That patience is not weakness, it is not ignorance, it is the behavior of a species that is confident enough in its own position to wait. They are not afraid of us, they are simply not interested in starting something that does not need to be started. The moment we give them a reason to change that position, the moment we strike or provoke or make clear that we intend to, that patience ends. He looked at Drevith steadily. You asked if I'm afraid of what they might do rather than what they have done. Yes, I am, because what they have done throughout all of their history is survive and continue, and I am not willing to make this empire into the next thing that tried to stop them and failed. That is not caution, that is calculation. Drevith sat down slowly. The room was quiet again. Vraxel placed both of his large hands on the platform surface and looked out at all of them. My advice to this council is this, he said. 4 things, simple and clear. First, do not start a war with humanity. Not now. Not over territory, not to make a point. The cost is too high, and the outcome is too uncertain, and we have too much to lose to gamble it on pride. Second, open formal diplomatic contact. They have been reaching out for 11 years. Every year we do not respond, we give them more reason to wonder what our silence means. Silence from a powerful neighbor does not read as peaceful. It reads as preparation. We should respond before they begin preparing in earnest. Third, propose a trade arrangement, not as a trick, not as a delay, a real one with real value on both sides. Human innovation in exchange for access to conclave networks and resources, what they can build when they are motivated by curiosity and partnership, is more useful to us than anything we could take from them by force. Fourth, understand what they are and stop being afraid of it. They are not a threat to be managed, they are a force that is going to be part of this galaxy, whether we want them to be or not. The question is whether they are a force that is pointed in the same direction as us, or against us. That choice is still ours to make. It will not be ours to make forever. He straightened the species that built. This conclave did not do it by picking fights with everyone who grew too large. They did it by making the right partnerships at the right moments. This is one of those moments. In 50 years, the humans will be too large to approach. As equals, they will be something else. Whatever we want our relationship with them to look like in 50 years, we need to begin building it now. He stepped back from the platform. The vote to table the military option was not unanimous. Drevith voted against it, along with 4 others who were not yet ready to let go of what they had come into the hall believing, but the majority held. The motion for war was set aside, not closed. Vraxel was not naive enough to think it was finished, but set aside, which was enough. 3 months later, a diplomatic vessel left conclave space and entered human territory. It carried a formal message of introduction and a request for talks. It was the first official contact the 2 civilizations had ever made. The vessel was met by a small human ship that guided it to a station near the edge of their space. On the station, waiting in a room with a wide viewport and a long table and cups of something warm and brown that smelled like nothing in the conclave's experience, was humanity's appointed ambassador to the galaxy. Dr. Yale Morin had not changed much in 14 years, a little older around the eyes, a little more gray in her hair. She stood when the conclave's delegation walked in, and she looked at them with the same calm, open expression she had worn when she first looked at an alien face on a small screen in the middle of nowhere. She extended her hand, the human gesture Vraxel had read about in the cultural files, an open hand offered without weapons, a tradition older than their civilization's records, and she smiled. "Took you long enough," she said. Somewhere across the stars, in the hall, made from the bones of a dead star, a general who had seen too many wars and chosen not to start another one, allowed himself something that he had not felt in a very long time: relief.